We'll continue our discussion on the pulse oximeter that we discussed last day. So the principles for pulse oximetry, the Beer-Lambert's law. So that has already been discussed. I guess you need to revisit the video that I have uploaded in case you did not follow the whole thing from the class. So that is the advantage we have because we are recording all the videos. You can revisit them at any point in time. And I have attached a reference notes also, right? That gives you a very practical explanation about how to go about doing such measurements, right? So this is from our lab notes as far as I remember. So today we'll finish off the discussion on the pulse oximetry. I'll actually show you how the device could be interfaced and write some basic code using the sensor that we are using to retrieve data, right? We are not going into very involved algorithms. That is something that we can do later, or I will give you some of the traces that are available from such device and you can explore that on your own, because there is no one single algorithm that is suitable for all different purposes. So we'll basically give you an indication of how this algorithm should be written, and later you can explore them on your own. Right? And then after that, we will start looking into the frequency domain analysis. Right? Till now, we were all looking at time, right? As you will also explore in your homework, to finding peaks and so on. And apart from that, we are also going to leverage some frequency domain tools, and I'm going to give you some intuition about how the frequency domain analysis works, right? I'm not going to go into very deep mathematical details, but assuming that you don't have any idea of signal processing, or you have not taken a class on that, I'm going to give you some intuition about how to deal with frequency domain components in time series data. Okay, so before going into that, I guess you have all looked at the homework. So I'm just pulling out slides from the last class's discussion. Hope you have already read it, right? So you have to collect 3 such videos, and I have told 3 specific activities, particularly to figure out the difference in between the heartbeat that you are going to see, right? So in case if you are resting, the heartbeat rate that you are going to see will be quite low, right? It will be like depending on your health, right? Your body. So you are going to see something like 60, 70, 80, right? Whereas if you are after a vigorous exercise that I mentioned, right? So there was 3 things. One is resting position, where you are going to see the minimum heart rate because of like very lack of activity in your body. The second thing was a moderate walk, which is going to bump up the heart rate. So this is some kind of a sanity check, right? So this is for you to appreciate that your beats per minute is actually going to increase, and you can see that using this entire pipeline. Right? So at the end of this experiment, writing the code for it and all, you will be at least be self-satisfied that whatever right activity you have done, and after that there was a certain increase in the heart rate, that you could actually check it for yourself. And the other one was this vigorous exercise. So these are the 3 instances of the videos that I asked you to collect. So this is very simple. You just place your finger on the camera and make sure that the flashlight is also covered. And the only restriction that you have to make sure that you are obeying is don't move your finger continuously, because that will impact the quality of the data samples that you are getting, and it will be basically hard to mine such time series data, right? There will be a lot of noise that you actually have to filter. So don't artificially introduce the noise, right? Of course, if you want to challenge yourself in developing sophisticated noise filtering algorithms, you are of course welcome to do that. But as long as our homework is concerned, we want to make it as simple as possible, right? So and I could have supplied you such videos, like 3 videos that you could have analyzed, but to make your learning more complete, I would suggest you collect your own video, right? You collect your own this blood sample video and do the analysis, right? That's more fun, I would say, compared to I providing you 3 instances of videos. right? And also another thing is that you will have all, so because you are all working on your own systems, all of you will have slightly different results because you are using your own data set, right? And as far as the analysis of a video frame or ingesting videos goes, you can use this Python OpenCV platform that gives you a nice bunch of tools to ingest a video, convert those videos into all the frames in the videos to NumPy arrays, and then you can do whatever analysis, right, you want to do. Right? So the first thing I asked you to do is that once you receive these 3 videos, there are one conversion that you might look at is how do you reduce the frame rate of the video. So originally you will collect the video at 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second, 60 or 30 depending on your smartphone camera hardware. So, and this will be collected in some resolution, right, that your camera allows, right? What is the megapixel capacity of your camera? Based on that, you will receive a definite size of your frame, right, which will be x and x pixels by y pixels. Okay, and there will be 2 kind of transformations that we are interested in. The first one is subsampling the video in terms of frames, right? As you are seeing that processing 60 frames per second or 30 frames per second, right, where each frame is also very large, this is just going to be resource intensive. Let's suppose we are actually implementing this optical PPG thing, right, in a device, right, in an IoT device. We don't want to have this much amount of computation, right? This is, since if you are doing it on a phone or on a laptop, it won't matter much. But if you are doing it on a low-end device, 60 frames might be a little bit high, right, or 30 frames per second. And the point is that you might not need this 30 frames per second in order to analyze your heartbeat, which has a very low frequency compared to that, right? You don't expect that many frames per second. So theoretically also you can justify that when we study about sampling and all, you will get to know all these things. But just practically speaking and doing some empirical studies on your own, you can appreciate this fact, right? So this can be done, the subsampling can be done using OpenCV, and you can check that, as I have posted the question, that how lower FPS you can support, right? Because you are also going to look at the noise present, right? So this data that you are getting is not free of noise. So taking into account the FPS and the noise that is present, you are going to filter some of it out, and so that the BPM is accurate. And the other thing was downscaling the video. So if it is x into y pixels, you want to downsample or downscale rather to a cross b pixels. Okay, so this is another transformation that you have to do. So after you ingest the frame, each and individual frame can be converted into this format. Okay? So I have posted some of the links there having a tutorial how to do this thing, but these are so common that you will very easily find it out in the internet if you do a little bit of a search how to use OpenCV to downscale and reduce your frames per second. So in all, you will have something like this. You will have a downsampled, downscaled version of the video and with a reduced FPS. And what you want to do is come up with an intensity metric on these frames to calculate the beats per second. That is our interest of this study, right? So what is the intensity metric? You are basically trying to come up with one number or one quantity per frame that is going to represent the overall intensity that you are looking for. So for frame number 1, right, you for frame number 2, frame number 3, frame number 4, and so on, right? This could be your downscaled and reduced frames per second video. So or it doesn't matter, the metric doesn't matter on exactly what version of the video is this, but any frame that you supply to the system, you have to figure out a metric that sort of represents the intensity that is present. And your motivation to design the intensity is to get as much SNR, or signal is to noise ratio, as possible. And what exactly do I mean by SNR? Let's say whenever you have a heartbeat, right, you want the maximum signal, and whenever you do not have the heartbeat, or some kind of an average reading, right, that you have, that should be whatever I'm showing in this line that I'm drawn. So this ratio, right, the difference that you are having with respect to the, let's say this is called the noise floor, and whenever you have a heartbeat, right, we call this a signal. Okay, metric has to be designed in such a way so as to get as much prominent peaks as possible, right, so that we can recover the signal easily. So if your noise floor is very high, or your signal is almost submerged in the noise, right, you will have a lot of spurious spikes, right, and you will keep on thinking that those spurious spikes might be actually heartbeats. Your algorithm might think that, and that will give you some false positives, right? There was not a heartbeat, but you thought that there was a heartbeat that is present. So you have to study a little bit on the peak detection algorithms. There are a lot of them, but what is important here is how to do the right parameterization of the peak detection algorithm. Available algorithms are there in the SciPy library, and within that I have already referred to the function that you can use, and within that also there are certain things that you can tweak, right? Like what is the distance in between two peaks, at least what is the minimum distance in between two peaks you can mention, or what should be the height of each individual peak with respect to the surroundings. Those kind of things you can tweak, right? For example, you won't be having two heartbeats within let's say a few milliseconds, right? That will not be possible, because the value that you are looking for could be, let's say, from 50 beats per second to 150 beats per second, right? Sorry, per minute, right? So this gives you some approximate idea about what kind of filtering you can use, right? So if you find some two peaks one after the other, such that the distance is so small in between them, it is sort of it gives you some kind of an unacceptably high beats per minute, right? So in those cases, you have to intelligently filter them out. So this will be some kind of a learning experience for you, even using this simple data set to do some kind of a realistic peak detection. Okay. So, and one more thing that I have mentioned is try to use a sliding window. So you don't want to do the entire analysis on the 20-second video. Rather, you can start with ingesting a 5-second video and slowly moving that window and change the statistics of the window every 1 second, let's say. So you start with a 5-second window. So you wait for the initial 5 seconds, get the entire data set, get the entire data, and create the statistics for that window. And from the next time onwards, what you can do is that slowly shift this frame, right? Slowly shift this window, or slide this window, and in chunks of, let's say, you don't want to recompute the entire statistics every sample. So maybe 1 second worth of sample you ingest again and recompute the values, right? So first time you want to do it from 0 to 5 seconds. Next time you want to do from 1 to 6 seconds, and so on. So this is like a queue, right? You are ingesting 1 second worth of samples, enqueuing and dequeuing 1 second worth of samples, right? So and you are going to create this aggregate statistics on this FIFO, right? So what is the average bits per second, or sorry, bits per minute on this window, that you can report. Okay, so this is about the homework. Any questions you have regarding it? Okay, so that seems fine. So I think most of you would be on page. So I would expect some good analysis from your end. Okay. So now I'll continue our discussion about the pulse oximetry hardware, right? That we started with sensing principles and tried to look at Beer-Lambert's law and looking at the alternating and the DC components and how to find out the value of SpO2 metric from those red and the infrared intensities that we are capturing from the photodiode. Okay, so we'll start with some basic idea about interfacing this device. So this is not any specialized device, right? This is just one hardware that happens to be popular, made by Maxim Integrated. But most of the principles will still hold. And this sensor is also, this kind of sensor is also developed by other vendors like NXP and so on. So I won't go into very nitty-gritty details that are specific to this particular sensor, but some of the functionalities that are available in this sensor are also available in many other sensors. So those principles are something to be discussed, right? You also learn those kind of things and you can apply them when you deal with such sensors later. Okay, so from the pinouts, right, that you can see what kind of digital interface does it have, what kind of a data bus does this have? Anybody? You just have two lines, right? SCL and STA. What does it mean? Nobody. It's an SPI bus or an I2C bus.
I2C bus.
I2C bus.
I2C bus, right? So just these two lines, right? So people who are not kind of familiar with these things, right? I think you should go back to the notes and the class videos, right? We have done as much as possible in terms of the lecture, right? It's all uploaded on the same day, right? You should at least go and look at these things. Okay, so SCL is the serial clock, and this is the data out, and we know that this is a two-wire interface. We have studied about all these things, programming these things, right? So this is the I2C bus, and this particular sensor delivers data through the I2C bus, right? So, and you know the relevant pin connections that you have to make in the microcontroller side. So the SCL is the clock which is normally sent to I think the analog pin A4, and this is probably this A5, right? So these are all mapped out in the manual, right? Either it could be A5, A4 or A4, A5. I don't remember this right now. Okay, so this is about the interfacing, and let me explain a little bit about the sensor and what it contains, right? So you already know in an abstract sense that it has to contain two particular things, the two types of LEDs, the red LED and the infrared LED, as well as the photodiode, right? And what else are the different hardware modules we have inside. So this is the proposed system design that one should have if you are using the sensor. That is already there in the manual book. You can check this manual from Maxim Integrated. So these are the things that we are interested in, right? We have this red and infrared LED, which is controlled by a set of LED drivers, and we are going to see what this LED driver actually does and how can you control data collection by configuring this LED drivers, right? So there are different ways to make the accuracy of your system better, right? And then of course as we are seeing this very sensitive data, right, the voltage that we are seeing in the photodiode as a result of the emergent ray, right, be it red LEDs, the red or infrared, we are basically trying to look at the intensity of the emerging ray, and it has as high as 18 bits, as you are seeing, right? In the full capacity, there are this an 18-bit ADC that it houses, right? Which you can understand that how many levels will it have, right? It will have 2 to the power 18 different levels, and we were talking about only 8-bit, 10-bit ADC. So this is a very sensitive sort of an application, and I would assume that medically certified or medical grade sensors will have even more a number of levels. So from here you can appreciate, right? So to get something in the order of like your hand movement or the step counter that we were trying to do, right? We did not require more than 8 bits, right? If we are looking at the voltage reference, right? RF is equal to 1.1. We also put earlier, if you remember some of the videos that we are doing and making minor movements with our hands, 10 bits was sufficient, were more than sufficient. Even with 8 or 9 bits, it was possible to figure out such movements. Whereas here there we were trying to look at events, whether somebody is in the proximity of the sensor or not. So some kind of a binary event we are trying to deal with. Here we are trying to we are actually interested in the intensity value, right? We are not anymore looking for an event. We are looking for the exact intensity value, and that's the reason we have so many bits in the ADC. So that is something that should register in your mind, right? And there is more hardware. So something called ambient light correction or cancellation, because wherever you do this measurement, there will always be some light present, right? There could be sunlight, right, which is also going to add to the DC component. And not only that, there could be also alternating components made by your fluorescent lights, right? The tube lights that you have at your home that is operating at 50 hertz, right? Even those things can be corrected in such hardware, right? So the ambient light that is present, one could be some of the DC thing which is always present, or even the interferences or the fluctuations in light that is coming from your all the household lamps and the fluorescent bulbs that you are having, right? So those are the things that also interfere with the reading of the photodiode. So those are the things that could be also corrected in hardware. So sometimes there could be sensors that are actually cheaper. They will not do all the sophisticated correction, and that is the reason they are cheaper. So you have to deal with all these things in your signal processing subsystem. Wherever you write the software, you basically get the analog samples converted to digital form, and you have to write your own algorithm to get rid of all these things, right? Whereas a little bit expensive sensors will do all this work for you in the hardware. And you already have a data storage in form of a queue, right? This is a queue or a FIFO, where the sensor is going to push, the ADC is going to push the data, and through the I2C bus, it is going to be pushed out to the microcontroller, right? Where you write the application on top. Okay, this is how not only this sensor, but most of the other sensors in this category work in this way. Okay. So we are going to look at 2-3 specific things about the data FIFO and the LED drivers. So the first one is about the data queue, and it has a length of 32 samples. Again, for a more expensive sensor, you might have this buffer a little bit larger in length, and that gives you a temporary storage of the data, right? Suppose you are not reading every sample out of the sensor, you can read all these things in batches, which is also going to decrease the amount of latency, right? You can read the entire thing, and then you can wait for the next batch of data to get written. And for those things, you always have some kind of interrupt that will be generated, right? I have not listed them out, but for any sophisticated sensor that you want to study, it will have an entire gamut of registers, right? Just as we have seen the input-output registers in case of our Atmega 328, for this kind of sensors, although it's an I2C device, but remember I already mentioned that there will be a lot of configuration registers and data registers. So these are the different registers. These are some examples of registers, right? Address of the location where you want to write, address of the location where you want to read from, right? There is an overflow counter flag, right? Suppose the data has been written and the queue is full. So those kind of things could be already checked in form of a status flags in these registers, right? So the firmware you are going to write will basically make sure that you are doing all the data reading and the data exchange and all the bookkeeping correctly. Okay, so there is nothing more to it, right? It's just the sensor or the ADC pumps in the data, and you have to read the data out of it, right? If this goes to the I2C bus. So as you understand, there are a little bit more sophistication on the hardware side. There are two types of data. One type of data is for the red channel, and the other type of data is for the IR channel, right? And you have to simultaneously get both the types of data. So the hardware makes sure that the samples are sort of interleaved properly. So you have a sample one for the red channel, and then you have a sample one for the IR channel. In this way, this will be interspaced, right? And the number of bytes that you are expending for the individual intensities, that is also variable, right? You might not need 18 bits. So if you need 18 bits, you will basically require 3 bytes, whereas you can even do it with 16 bits, which will require you 2 bytes or even less, right? So there are predefined configurations that I can manage. Okay, so there is one more feature, is on-chip averaging, right? Sometimes if for many sensors, not only this sensor, there will be a facility for doing runtime average on this moving window, right? And we often ignore this feature. We read this data and then do the entire thing in the software once again, right? Whereas it will be many times faster to do it on the hardware, right? And we are often not aware of all these things. So you have to actually go and look into the manual that I keep on repeating for many times while you deal with such new sensor. Any new sensor come to your hand, you, while looking at the manual, you have to keep your sort of eyes open for this kind of features, right? And now think about the latency. You are if you are trying to do a runtime average, running window average of 32 samples, right? And they could be potentially let's say 2 bytes long, right? And after you add all those numbers and then you divide it by n, calculate the mean, that involves floating point division and so on. So in order to avoid those kind of situations, ideally you should ask the hardware to do that for you, right? So this is just a thing that is important to mention. That's why I mentioned this thing. And then there are many other kinds of features that are specific to this particular chip, right? So this is about the reading of the data from the sensor. Okay, and mind it that there will be always some third-party libraries that will be present or given by the vendor, which will do all this the down and dirty work for you, and you will be exposed to some kind of an API from where you will be reading, right? So all the software abstractions that we have been talking from the very beginning, all the heavy lifting will be done by the firmware, right? So this Maxim Integrated will be developing their own firmware for their chip, right? And that will be used by the software developer, who is going to use the APIs provided by them. And in case you need to improve the performance, right? Many of these libraries are often not written to the most optimal level. So in those cases, what is anticipated is you have to go and look at the inefficiencies that are popping out from that particular library and make corrections and is to tune your application's performance, right? And for that, you have to have a very clear understanding of the features that are available on this chip. Okay, so this is about the data queue. So next, we are going to look at the LED driver. So there are 4 things that you can control, and there is a principle behind it. It's not that randomly they have given all these different tweaks to do. So the first one is amplitude control. This is basically how much bright you want to shine the LEDs, right? So this is something comparable to the input intensity. If you remember, we were writing some sort of an equation like the output intensity is equal to the input intensity multiplied by e to the power minus the length of the column, concentration, and the extinction coefficient, right? This was the Beer-Lambert's law. And here, if you see, the input intensity must be can be controlled and must be known in order to basically look at the loss or to cross calculate the concentration values, right? We were taking all these ratios and all earlier. So this is a proxy. The LED brightness is a proxy for the input intensity, and you can control it in 255 level. So basically, it takes a control byte, and I think there are several possible voltage current levels that you can allow through the LED, from starting from 0, which is 0, I think, till 255, which is 50 milliamps. Right. So this is one aspect, right? This is what is the brightness of the LED, or what is the energy that you are putting. Now the other sorts of the other control parameters that you have relates to the temporal domain, right? It relates to timing. So the first one is the pulse width control, right? So although we know that how bright your LED will be, we have not mentioned that how long it is going to be shining, right? So because you have to give some amount of time for the photodiode to register the output voltage, right? The IO that is coming out, right, and being registered in the photodiode. So it will need some minimal amount of time to be exposed to that emergent ray, and to look at the to evaluate the voltage, right, which basically goes to the analog to digital converter, and that tells you what was the received intensity of the output or the emerging ray. And you can have several configurations. So this particular chip gives you several on and off timing. So on means how much time it will be turned on, right, and the rest of it is off. So if you look at the manual, you will see that 69 microseconds it can be configured that it will be turned on, and then it will be turned off, and again after some time it will be turned on. I'm going to go into the exact details about the off timing, right? So this is also mentioned. And another related thing is you can also mention, instead of carefully choosing some kind of a pulse width control, you can directly mention how many samples per second do you need, right? So this can be like 50 samples per second to as high as 3,200 samples per second. And as you have already seen earlier, right, if you demand more and more samples per second, the resolution that you will be getting out of the ADC is going to reduce, right? So if you are using a very, like in this case, if let's say you are using 15 bits, of course you can use lots of samples per second, right? Whereas if you are wanting something that is of a higher resolution, let's say 18 in this case, you won't be able to use a very high sample rates, right? So there will always be a trade-off, and all these things in this particular system are related, right? How much is the pulse width? If you have a long time for this pulse width, right, instead of 69, if you do make it 411, right, you can spend more time getting more accurate results. The noise will be filtered here, whereas you won't be having too many samples, right? Because this is the entire time that you are taking for one on part of the pulse, right? So this will make sure that your samples are accurate, but your sample rate is low, right? You will have less number of samples per second. Whereas in the previous case, you will have more samples per second, but the sample will not be that accurate. Okay, so there are these fine trade-offs, and depending on the software, right, you are writing, you can choose whatever you want to do. Suppose you want to basically filter out the noise in software, right, and you would be happy to get as many samples as possible, maybe you can do that, right? So that fine tuning is that is your engineering, right? How much you want to, like, for what performance you want to engineer the system for. Okay, so there will be always minute differences in performance if you want to test the system. Okay, so this is this chart kind of summarizes the discussion that we had just now. So the maximum sample rate for the ADC depends on the selected pulse width, which in turn determines the ADC resolution. So you cannot really choose whatever you feel like. So if you keep on increasing your pulse width, let's say to 411, in that cases you are not going to use very high sample rates, right? It can go till something like 400 samples per second, whereas if you are choosing something like short pulse width like 69, it is going to go to 1600 samples per second, right? Okay, and similarly in case of the resolution, right? You will have different kinds of resolutions that are possible in the ADC for each such configuration. Okay, so these are kind of predefined in the hardware to get proper samples out of the system. Okay, so these configurations are already hardwired. The timing and all the circuits that are all set up, and you are just going to write or configure the registers, the appropriate registers that will control the pulse width. So there is a register for register bits are already dedicated for which what kind of pulse width mode you want to choose. So typically we have seen many examples like this earlier. Right? Maybe this is like a 2-bit you need to set. Let's say this is 0 0, this would be 0 1, this would be 1 0, and this would be 1 1. Somewhere in some register you need to change the configuration in this way, right? And there will be details, right? Maybe if you are putting an illegal configuration that cannot be supported by the hardware will do something on their own. Okay, and this is about the, on the right hand side, this is about the on and off pulse, right? So every configuration of the on time is associated with some kind of a time before the next pulse. So in this case, there will be IR and the red that will be interleaved. So first the red light turns on, and corresponding to 69 microseconds, it is already mentioned in the data sheet that what time the LEDs will be turned off for, right? And then there will be again a burst of 69 seconds where your IR is going to glow. Okay, and the photodiode is going to ingest this data, and then the next pulse is again going to be repeated after this part, right? 931 seconds. So these timings are already mentioned, and these timings will change for your choice of the pulse width. Okay, so the takeaway point here is that you cannot randomly configure such systems. More your pulse width is here, the more accurate, the more precise your sample would be. It will be devoid of noise. The noise will be lesser, and the number of samples that you can collect will also become less. Okay, so in that way, that is your trade-off, right? Whether you want to get a lot of inaccurate samples or less number of accurate samples. Okay, and one more role is also played by the ADC, right? The ADC's resolution determines what is the precision of individual samples that you are collecting. Okay, so quickly I'll go over a little bit of a code. This you can anyway implement and see it working if you happen to have this sensor, but anyway I'll give you some of the collected data that I have done myself. You can do your own analysis. Right, so typically we have to do a configuration of the sensor, and here I have borrowed the library from SparkFun. They have a sensor called this 30105, which is kind of a superset of the functionalities that are provided by the 30102. Right, they have some additional sensors called particle sensor, but we are just interested in this library for dealing with this part. Right, and if you actually look at the functions of the APIs they provide, you can actually see the real functions which are implementing the firmware, where it is requesting the data read from the FIFO, configuring the registers, and so on. So we already know we have to use the WARE library in order to talk to the TWI devices, 2-wire devices, or the I2C devices. So, and the other thing here is the configuration of the sensor. So if these are just values I have put. You can choose your own and experiment with them, and these are some of the standard the options that you have, right, based on the registers register allowed values. Let's say the LED brightness, right? What is the intensity that you are putting in, the sampling average, how many averages what is the size of your averaging window, whether it is 1, which does not mean any averaging, 2, 4, 8, 16, and 32. So all these things could be selected by choosing a byte. Okay. So there is an LED mode, whether you just want to have only red is on, or you also need the IR along with it, right? Suppose you want to do only heartbeat detection and not SpO2, and as you are doing it with your phone camera. So in that case, maybe the red light is fine. You don't need both of them. And I'll also show you a demonstration that not both of them are required if you're just looking at heartbeat. So similarly, we have the sample rate, pulse width, ADC, and so on, and then you can initialize the sensor like this. Okay, and then you can simply read out the data from the queue. And what we are basically doing, whenever there is a data that is available in the queue, we are getting the IR data. So they have separate APIs for reading infrared intensity and reading red intensity. So send to PC is just a simple serial write that I have done. So I have chosen the ADC range. If you see, this is 2 bytes. So 16 bits. And what we are basically sending is this 2 bytes of data, right? UINT 16. And so, and after sending the red intensity and the IR and the red intensity, just write a new line, right? So that in the receiving end, you can very easily have a API call for reading the serial port, and you can always read a line, right? That becomes very easy to parse the data, right? If you have this IR data followed by the red data and followed by a new line, right? So you can always read this chunk out, right? In your laptop, let's say you have connected this device and reading out of the serial port, it becomes very easy to read it, right? Otherwise, you have to read all the data, and then this will be all bytes, right? And then you have to arrange these bytes in proper order so that you can make sense out of the IR 2 bytes, and then there will be red 2 bytes. Again, there will be IR 2 bytes. All the rearranging you have to do. Right? You can always do it for more efficiency. You can send, instead of sending one IR and one red data every time out, you can have a entire array, and that you can write to the entire thing that you can write together, right? Instead of calling this function every time. Okay, you can store the entire thing and then do one time write. So those are the things that are possible. Okay, so this is the send to PC. You can do any kind of an implementation of this function. This is just for this particular data type that I was trying to send out, but you can write your own function to write an array and so on. So this is the actual output, right? If you if I put my fingers on top of the device, you can very clearly see the heartbeats, right? At least the periodic nature of the data is very clearly visible. And on the left hand side, I show the intensity in terms of the ADC count, right? I can go up to 2 to the power 16, and you can see that IR has sort of a higher value, and the amplitude would also vary. Right? In case of the red, it is from 11,000 to something like 12,000, whereas in case of lesser, in case of IR, right? 51,400 to 51,600. Right? So it's just a matter of scale, but whenever you are trying to compare these two, because when you try to figure out the SpO2, you have to deal with the ratio and so on, right? In that case, in those cases, you have to make sure that you really are taking into account their individual fluctuations, right? Individual fluctuations and their DC offsets also, right? If you see here, this is all 8,000 plus, whereas in this case, this is like 50,000 plus, right? You have to all bring them down by removing the DC component of the signal, right? And that has, we can, in some part of some later classes, we can discuss, and lots of filters are available, for example, Butterworth filter and all, but we can just go to some intuitive discussion about how to get rid of these DC components. Okay, and another thing that I have asked you in your homework is looking at the heart rate, right, or the bits per minute. So I'm basically calculating the bits per minute based on the red intensity on the top, that is, and the IR intensity on the bottom, they are pretty much similar, 90 or 91 bits per minute, right? And as you see that it will keep on changing, because this is just a small window of 3 or 4 seconds. Okay, so the dotted things are wherever I am detecting a peak, right? So this is not the only method to get the heart rate. So normally another popular technique, right, if you are interested in your analysis, right, while you do the analysis based on the phone camera, you will see a lot of spurious spikes like this, right? There is some filtering that I have done, but not shown here. So actual data might look a little bit more noisy than this, right? It might have, there might be local maxima and minima. Okay, so often in case of this heart rate detection, another popular technique is to look at the location of maximum gradient, right? So if you see this particular swing always in the downward swinging part, right, you will see a nice straight line kind of a thing coming down, right? So you can even find out locations where you have this maximum gradients. Okay, that is another popular technique. So this is another flavor, another algorithm. You don't always have to look at peaks, but you can look at locations with maximum gradients, and those are the that you can use for counting the bits per minute. Okay. So this data I'll try to give it to you, and then I would ask you to. So this is not mandatory. People who feel like doing more analysis on top of such data, try to understand this data more, and you don't have access to these sensors, for them it will be really helpful, right? So you can try out some of your own algorithms, right? Finding out the heart rate, and even potentially trying to figure out the SpO2 value from here, right? By reading the algorithm and trying to implement your own. And we also looked at, before we move on towards the frequency domain analysis, I am going to take you back to our initial experiment that we have done, right? So in this one, we have the previous one, we have looked at the movement of the heart, and we actually have started from tracking the movement of our hands and legs, right? We tried to detect some of these macroscopic fluctuations in voltage that is very easy to detect using, even as I was saying, 8-bit ADCs, right? We don't even need 10-bit for detecting such movements. And we could have repeated the same experiment or repeated the same algorithm. We could have done just the peak counting, and the peak counting could have told us how many steps per second you are taking. If it is a very large number of steps per second, you are probably running, or if it is very less, you are probably almost static or walking very slowly. So those kind of analysis would have been possible. But on the other hand, there is a lot of this problem because of the noise that is present in this data, and sometimes doing a very nice analysis of in the time domain becomes difficult, right? So to shortchange, we can also look at frequency domain tools, right? So that specifically focus on what is the periodicity of the data that is present in this time series, right? So if you are looking at some of the examples, right? So there is a certain periodicity, right? It's not a random piece of data. There is a certain well-behaved repetition on the data, and this repetition could be nicely captured using frequency domain tools. Okay, and I'm just going to go over this Fourier transform, which is a most important frequency domain tool in order to decouple the different frequency components that are present. So in this case, the primary target that I was tracking were my legs, and here we are just interested about the periodicity that is happening because of my legs movement, right? But apart from my legs, I could have also tracked my knees or my ankles and so on. That might have more intricate movements and might result in different frequency components. But in this case, we were not interested in that. We were just getting some macro behavior. But in case you are trying to do very intricate gesture recognition, let's say using different fingers, right? How you are moving your fingers, and you are trying to track that. In those cases, different frequency components might be useful, right? But we just want to understand how this frequency domain components are actually derived, right? At least from an intuitive perspective. Okay, so as we have seen, both in case of heart rate as well as for step count, we were dealing with periodic events, and we are just going to look at how this actually works. Okay, so if we are not able to complete this entire thing today, we are going to look at this thing in the next class. We'll see how much we can do for today. Okay, so we are just going to start with the basic intuition, right? I am not expecting to have any signal processing background on your end, right? So imagine something like a tape, right? And this tape has a start and it has an end, and there are repeating colors on the tape. Okay, this is a very simple example, and every offset or every color has its own index, which is basically the index starting from 1, which is the start, and this index continues, right, to 40, 50 and so on. So this is towards the end of the tape. So we are trying to frame questions like, how often do you see different colors repeat themselves, right? Let's say how often green is repeated or how often red is repeated, right? And we want to come up with an intuitive technique to solve this problem. Suppose you are actually given this tape, which is an analog of the time domain data that you are getting. We are basically getting a series of voltage values, but for the time being, we are keeping them apart. Let's concentrate on this hypothetical example, and we want to come up with a way in order to get how often these different colors are repeated. Any idea if you are, how do you go about it systematically? Anybody? What is an algorithm to do this thing? A very intuitive algorithm, right? If you have a physical piece of tape, what exactly you are going to do? Anybody? So I'll give you a hint, right? Let's say you have in your disposal scissor, right? What you can potentially do is try to find out a certain interval and cut this tape into different chunks, right? Let's say you want to cut the tape at this 5th point, and then you will have all the entries from 1 to 5, right? And then stack these portions of the tape on top of each other. So what will happen is, if you cut from 1 to 5, keep it there, then cut from 6 to 10, keep it, like stack it on top of the previous one, and so on, right? So if you cut all of them, if you see that somehow there is a pattern that starts emerging, right? Somehow magically the red colors are all lined up, right? And what is the magic factor here? The magic factor is basically the distance or the offset that you have used, right? At what distance apart you are cutting the tape using the scissor, right? That is the key to get this particular pattern, right? Instead of 5, if you are using something like 6 or 7, as you will see, you might not end up getting this particular pattern, right? So let's say instead of 5, we are trying to use some other offset, right? Let's say we are using 8, right? So 1 to 8 basically becomes one part of the chunk, and then we are going to cut from 9 to 17. Okay, so 9 to 16, right? So if you stack them up together, you see another, like now we don't have any pattern of the red color or even the yellow color, whereas we can see the green colors are nicely stacked up now, right? Earlier it was this red color, now we see this green color stacked up. Whereas in case of, let's say, if you have an offset of 10, right, 1 to 10, then 11 to 20, and then 21 to 30, we see another color coming out like yellow, right? Although we see other components present, right? Red is present here, red is present here. We have another combination of yellow that is very prominently present, right? Whereas if you choose something, let's say random, right? I am doing this offset of 7, right? There is nothing particular that is coming out in terms of pattern, right? So in essence, what we are getting is, based on the control of the offset at which we are placing the scissors at, we can expect a certain pattern to emerge, right? And that pattern somehow brings out a certain color in this case, right? So in case of the first one where we were using an offset of 5, we could see the red color emerging out. Whereas in case of the last one where we are using an offset of 10, we could see the yellow color emerging out, right? In this case, there is no prominent candidate. Okay, there is no prominent candidate who is actually coming up, right? So at least from an algorithmic standpoint, if you are given such a tape, right, you can, or this tape is an analog of this time domain data, as I have mentioned, you can write an algorithm to do this, right? That won't be a difficult job. So you want to change this offset and then stack up the data and then basically see that whether you have this pattern emerging out. Okay. So now what we were doing is repeating these patterns of colors, right? And then trying to segregate these color components. So what are these color components? What are the different repetitions each individual color has? Let's say this red is repeated every 5 gaps, right? Every 5 colors later, we are having a red component. Whereas for green, it's being repeated after every 8 gaps. For yellow, it is 10 gaps, right? So similarly, what we will have is a repeating pattern of amplitudes, right? Earlier we had it with colors, right? But in our real world where we deal with outputs coming out of the sensors, these are all voltage levels, right? We don't have any particular color associated with that, right? We basically have some pattern of amplitudes. Some of the amplitudes will repeat with a certain periodic nature, right? And our idea is to segregate or dismantle that into different constituting components, right? And here, instead of having how many gaps every color repeats, we are basically going to look at things called frequencies. Okay, so this is also frequency in some sense, right? You can always have a notion of frequency from this thing, that every 5 gaps the red color is repeated, again denotes some kind of a frequency also, given that what is the time that was being spanned for this entire pattern. From there you can figure that out, right? So similarly, in case of our sensor data, wherever we have periodic nature of events that are embedded, our task is to segregate them into different frequency components. Okay, there could be certain events that are repeated at a frequency of f1. There could be a certain event that are repeated at a frequency of f2, something repeated at f3, and so on. And all you had was a mixed up thing, right? So even in case of the colors, you could see there are like certain locations where some of the colors were all mixed up, right? Because somehow that became the least common, lowest common multiple, right? So in those cases, you had a common offset for both the colors, right? Similarly, these things could happen in case of frequencies. So all we are doing is merging this different frequency domain components and getting this data, right? So this is the thing that is coming from the sensor. Our idea is to do the other way around. So nobody is going to give you f1, f2, and f3. This is just for understanding the problem. We are going to figure this thing out. Okay, our task is to figure out f1, f2, and f3. So for doing that, a popular way for teaching this thing is making use of this coiling machine. Just treat this as a black box now, right? If you follow some of the online materials that are actually available, so as it's a very nice analogy that I find in order to understand the Fourier transform. Right? Let's say you have this input signal that is present, that is what you want to tease apart multiple frequencies of, and we stop using the scissor for the time being. We don't use the scissor, but we use this black box called the coiling machine. And what is the task of the coiling machine? It's going to be a mathematical construct that can respond to the following queries asked to the system. What kind of a query? The query would be, is f1 present or not? Okay, so you ask the black box, tell me whether f1 was present or not. So in analogy, I can ask the system that whether the red color is present prominently or not, whether the green color was present prominently or not, right? Or whether any color was repeating at 5-gap interval, right? You can say, yeah, at a 5-gap interval, red color was repeating. Then I can ask whether there was any color being repeated at a 6-gap interval. So you can say there was no color that was being repeated at 6-gap interval. So I'm referring to this particular problem, right? So these are the different analogs of frequency, right? If you say, was there any color which was repeating at, let's say, 7 gaps, you will say no. If you say 10, you will say yes. The answer is yellow, right? So in this case, we don't have any colors per se, but you have to deal with some kind of an amplitude. So similarly, like F1, you might have other frequencies also. You can ask the system whether each one of these particular frequencies were present or not. Okay, so this is a yes, no, or you can say you can assign a score, right, to each and individual frequencies, that what was kind of a relative weight of that particular frequency that you can assign. So if you are given F1 to Fn, for every value of this Fi, you can tag some kind of a weight, right? Let's say I have a weight called Wi, and you can see that how this Wi changes with I, right? And let's say for certain I's, you have peaks, right? You have spikes. So you can say that, oh, okay, so maybe F11, F10, and F9 were dominant, and the rest were not dominant. Okay, so this is the basic idea about what we want to achieve using this machine. So is this idea clear? Okay. So we'll try to construct this machine, right? So how exactly we are going to deal with this problem is, we want to, instead of cutting it out using a tape, we want to wrap this in a circle. So earlier what we were doing, we are actually putting a scissor, right, and cutting these portions and stacking them up, right? So now instead of stacking them up, you can do the same thing. You can take the entire this thing, the tape, right, and then wrap it in a circle. It's very much like you have in a sellotape, right? The sellotape is actually wrapped on top of the ring, the paper ring that you have in between. So very similarly, you take this entire fixed time series data. Let's say this spans something like t seconds, right? And then you want to wrap this data on top of this circle, okay, at a certain frequency, or which means how many times that you are wrapping it around the circle. Okay, so you can wrap it either 2 times, or you can wrap it 4 times, you can wrap it 5 times. So mathematically, you can think that the tape is as elastic as possible. So that is not a problem. Okay, so in this case, let's say you just wrap it once, right? So you start from, so let's say I identify this with 1, 2, and 3. So 1 comes here, then 2, and then 3, and the tape is done. Okay, so the tape has completed. Whereas you can have different frequencies of the coiling machine, right? Instead of making 1 rotation per second, 1 rotation around the circle, you can make some other, you can choose some other number, how many times you want to rotate it, right? Let's say in case of F2, you have this is 1, then it is so much stretched out that 2 comes here, and then it surpasses 1 more time, and then 3 comes here, right? This is also possible. Okay, so in this F3 case, you can have, let's say 1 is here, then there is a huge stretching, and then 2 comes here, right? And then let's say, or maybe 2 comes here, and then 3 comes here, right? So first is 1, then you actually rotate it, then 2, and then you make it 1 more turn, right? And then it comes to 3. That's why it's called this coiling machine, right? It's kind of wrapping it in form of a spiral, right? And for a certain value of F, right, let's say F4, they could be all stacked up. So that's the beauty of the coiling machine. Okay, so how many times we are wrapping around the circle is determined by the F, and for certain value of F, you can see this pattern starting to emerge. right? They could be all stacked up. Okay, so that is the analogy while we travel from the intuition of the scissor based system to the coiling machine. Okay, and how do we actually quantify this stacking up of the different values here? So this could be very like similar to, right, how what is the difference for these four these cases, right? You have this 1, 2 and 3, whereas in case of 4 you can already see that they are all nicely stacked up, and I can feel that F4 is a frequency component that would be present here, right? Because they, if you are rotating it in every sort of F4 frequency rate, they will be aligned nicely. So this is going to come back after this fixed period of time. So the rate is going to come back exactly after this fixed period of time. You get 2, and exactly after that fixed period of time, you are going to get 3, right? So that is the reason they get nicely aligned when you choose a very particular value of frequency. And what is frequency here? The number of times we are wrapping this hypothetical tape around the circle. Okay, you can wrap it once, you can wrap it twice, you can wrap it thrice, you can wrap it 100 times, right? And you might not get anything by wrapping it so many times, but our point of interest is wherever they are nicely stacked up like this. Okay, so the analog that we are going to use here is something called the resultant, right? Like it's something like the center of mass. Okay, so if you see here, the center of mass will be all pulled in different directions, right? So you'll have some kind of an amplitude value everywhere, because these are data points, right? You are making use of amplitude value that are coming out from sensors, right? After the at the end of the day, right? So if you look at the angular part of it, right? We have not yet introduced that, but at least pictorially you can look at the amplitude part of it. They will be nicely stretched out, right? Which basically makes your center of mass more towards the like 0, right? It's in this case also they are all stretched out in different directions. Maybe the center of mass is here, right? Maybe I'll choose a different color. Okay, maybe the center of mass is here. In this case, the center of mass could be in the center, whereas here it could be somewhere like here, right? And in this case, the center of mass could be way out of this circle, and it could be something like this, right? So if you see, the resultant center of mass could be one approximation of the Wi that I was talking about, right? Remember, I was trying to assign a Wi for every Fi. Okay, you can try out different Fi's for I is equal to 1 to n, right? All different kinds of F you can try out, and for every such exercise, you can get a value of Wi, right? And this Wi is something that you can simply plot, right? So what you can do is that you can choose this F1, F2, ... up to Fn, and for every such Fi value, you can simply plot this Wi. Right? Maybe there is a high part in case of F2, right? In case of, let's say, F11, it's very high, and rest I don't find anything prominent. From there, you can very easily figure out that, let's say, this is Wi, right? You can very easily figure out that I have something dominant that is going on in these two particular frequencies, F2 and F11. Okay. So in this way, you can use this entire coiling machine as a nice filter. Okay, if you have any repeating components, if you ask the right question to the filter, that tell me whether a particular frequency is present, right, or some Fi is present or not, it can give you a sort of a relatively nice answer compared to the other Fi's, right? Don't get too much bogged down to the exact value of Wi, but you can have a relative comparison of this Wi across the board, right? If you do a relative comparison of Wi, that can give you the relative importance of these weights. Okay, so I hope this intuition is clear, and next we will try to understand the implementation of the coiling machine. And so for today, I will keep it up to here, right? Because I cannot start something new, it will get too late. So next day I can and I can basically discuss how to implement such coiling machine, and in reality we'll be ending up using some kind of an API like this DFT or FFT and so on for getting these frequency components, right? But for your understanding purposes, it's better to know how it works so that you can do more involved things using the frequency domain tools. Okay, so I'll keep it till here, and